Okay, so in this lesson we are looking at samples and surveys. We're also looking at experiments and observational studies. And I would like for you to also be able to understand the phrasing of questions and bias and how that affects results. So, first off, a population is all members of a set. A sample is a part of the population. So if you determine a sample carefully, it can give a good estimate of the total population. So let me give you an example. A population. In a population, you might be interested in so that's this region, right? This is the population. In order to, let's suppose I was creating a certain product that I wanted to sell to the people, the residents of Knoxville, Tennessee. In order to create that product and advertise it properly, I can't really survey every single person, the entire population of Knoxville, Tennessee. It just doesn't make sense. It's impossible. It's difficult enough for the U.S. government to do a census every decade or whatever. They have to work really hard in order to get information from every single household, every single person. Not just household, homeless as well. So, okay, I want to reach the entire population, but instead of talking to each member of the population, I'm going to select a smaller sample. Smaller group in that population. Now, ideally, my sample should represent all of the Knoxville, Tennessee area. That make sense? Let me ask you, if I wanted to select Bearden, do you think that the population in Bearden, the people there, their ideas, ideologies, everything about them, do you think that is very representative of all of Knoxville? No, I mean it wouldn't be fair. I mean that's a smaller community within Knoxville, the Knoxville, Tennessee region. We'll say Knox County, all right? So, but this, either way, whether it's a good sample or a bad sample, this is a sample. Could I possibly reach out to the majority of people in Bearden? Yes. It's a little bit easier to manage than trying to reach out to all of Knoxville, Tennessee. Could I take a different approach? Could I instead somehow go through the phone book for all of Knoxville, Tennessee, or Knox County, and pick out individuals from the phone book? Could I go that route and get a sample? I mean I could. I could reach. Okay, so the idea here is you have the bigger population and then you have a sample, a smaller part of the population, and ideally you want that sample to represent the bigger population. Okay? So how do you find a sample? Like, how do you select a particular sample? Well, there's a couple different types of samples. There's the convenience sample, the self-selected sample, systematic sample, and a random sample. And here are the definitions for each. For a convenience sample, you basically select any members of the population who are conveniently and readily available. For instance, I could, let's suppose I wanted to ask the high school I wanted to figure out what everyone's favorite brand of cereal is. Okay? Now, I could certainly ask all, 1,200 students at the school, or I could just go down to the cafeteria during one of the lunch blocks and just ask all the people in the cafeteria. Now, me going into the cafeteria during one of the lunch blocks, for example, that would be a type of convenience sample. I select members who, I just stand right there in the line. As everyone's going through the lunch line, I'm asking every single, okay, which is your favorite? Which is your favorite? Which is your favorite? I'm just marking it off the list. Real simple. Okay, it's convenient. Self-selected is, for example, you're walking through the mall. When you walk through the mall, you have those people standing there with the clipboards, and they walk up to you. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, ma'am. Do you care to answer a few questions on our survey? Right? What can you say?
No.
But what do some of us who are weak say? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Because they follow us for a couple steps, and it's like, I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for them that they got to stand there with a clipboard and ask people survey questions. So that is a self-selected sample because I am selecting myself. I am choosing to participate. Does that make sense? A systematic sample would be, I go to the phone book and I've got it all listed alphabetically, so I just pick every 5th phone number. Does that make sense? Or if I'm still on that cereal example, I could, instead of asking everybody during one of the lunch blocks, I could, let's say I could have everybody in the gym, line everybody up from shortest to tallest. Or I could line everybody up from youngest to oldest. Or I could line everyone up from, alphabetically. Some sort of systematic way. I organize them, I line them up, and then I select at what? Regular intervals. In a random sample, all members of the population are equally likely to be chosen. So how could we do a random sample? Put everybody in the gym. Everybody's there. I blindfold myself. Everybody's silent. I have no idea who is who. And we say, okay, scatter, mingle. Yeah, everybody's moving all the time. So then I walk through, and in every, say 10 seconds, I touch the person next to me. And that's going to be somebody that I interview. Okay? That's maybe an idea. It's just it's random, right? I don't know who I'm picking. They're all mixed around. They're all equally likely to be chosen. And so that's a random sample. Okay? Next slide. So, public opinion. Newspaper wants to find out what % of the city population favors a property tax increase to raise money for local parks. What is the sampling method used for each situation? Does the sample have a bias? Explain. So I want the sampling method, and does it have a bias attached to it? Well, let's talk about that. In order to answer this question, you got to go back to the problem itself. A newspaper wants to find out what percent of the city population, okay, the city population, like all of Knoxville, Tennessee, favors a property tax increase. To do what? To raise money for the local parks. That is what that's our goal. That's what we're looking for. So, here are three different A, B, C. These are three different sampling methods, and maybe there's some bias attached to it. Let's find out which one is which, and so let's start with letter A. A newspaper article on the tax increase invites readers to call the paper and express their opinions. Okay? So you had these sampling types: convenience, self-selected, systematic, or random. Letter A. What do you think, what type of sampling method do you think this is, and what sort of bias do you believe that might be attached to it? Let me hear from Amelia. If you're watching this, go ahead. What were you saying?
Would it be systematic?
Okay, maybe systematic, maybe. Let me just call on a couple of you. Let's find out what everyone's thinking. Morgan, you got four options. You got the definitions here. You got convenience.
It's a 25% chance.
Yeah, but let's not just kind of guess. Okay, wait. One person at a time here. Convenience. Those who are conveniently, we're just selecting someone that's, people that are conveniently and readily available. Self-selected, they volunteer for the sample. They volunteer to participate. They choose themselves. They self-select. Okay. Systematic. I line them all up, and I pick from regular intervals. Random. All members of the population are equally likely to be chosen. Okay, so let's go back to this. A newspaper wants to find out what percent of the city population favors a property tax increase to raise money for local parks. Okay, so their approach is, it's a newspaper article. It's an article about the tax increase. So someone who's reading who's going to see this article? It's someone, whoever has the newspaper. They're reading the newspaper. They're going to read about the tax increase. You know, it's going to invite readers to call the paper. Invites readers to call the paper and express their opinions. Okay, so what's your thoughts? Okay, I hear convenience, and we also had a moment ago, what was the other option?
Systematic.
Systematic, okay. So maybe it's convenience, maybe it's systematic. What do you say, Christian?
I think it's self-selected.
Self-selected. Addison, what do you say? Self-selected. I agree. This is self-selected because the readers have to self-select themselves. They have to decide, I'm going to call. I'm going to choose myself to participate. if it's self-selected, is there any bias here? Now, we haven't really officially talked about bias, but let's think about bias this way. Tell you what, let's freeze on the bias discussion for a moment. We'll come back to it after I officially define it. So we're going to say self-selected, and then we'll say the bias, and we'll figure that out in a moment. Let's look at letter B. What if a reporter interviews people leaving the city's largest park? Now, once again, the issue was the newspaper wants to find out what percent of the city population favors a property tax increase to raise money for the local parks. So, a reporter interviews people leaving the city's largest park. What sampling method is this? Let me hear from Nick. Okay, I hear random. And Brittany, what do you say? Convenience. Okay, and let me hear from Sadie. Convenience. Danny? Convenience. Chris? Okay, convenience. So the reporter is standing outside the city's largest park, stops them, interviews them. We got convenience, self-selected, systematic, and random. I'm going to agree. This is convenience. Now there's probably going to be some bias involved here. So let's talk about that in a moment. Survey. A survey service calls every 50th listing from the local phone book. Okay, so what method is this, Shay?
Systematic.
Systematic. And I'm just going to go with it. We all know that that's true. Is there bias? I don't know. Let's find out in a moment. Kind of don't want to. Let's jump over here to this bias. Now, so I'm moving a little bit ahead in your notes. Unit 2A3 bias. What does it mean? So here we go. A poorly written survey question can introduce bias. Poorly written survey question can introduce bias. Survey question should be clear, precise, and fair so that everyone hears the same question. It should avoid combining two or more issues. It should avoid double negatives, overlapping answer choices, words that cause strong reactions, a loaded question, and suggesting that you want a particular answer, leading question. These are 5 different types of bias. So, for example, a survey question that asks, don't you agree that apples are the best fruit? This is biased because the words, don't you agree, it makes you feel like you need to pick yes. Don't you agree? When I look at you, I don't know. Don't you agree? It makes you almost feel like you have to say yes in order to be part of the cool people, in order to be, I don't know. So it leads you, even if you don't really agree. So is there any bias in this survey question here? Do you think farmers should use poison to control insects on crops? Just by show of hands, and I'm interested. So by show of hands, Who thinks that there is probably some bias here? Okay, got a couple people saying yes, there's bias. Hands down. Who thinks there's no bias involved in this particular question? Okay, maybe about half, maybe 2/3 of the class. All right, so those of you that said there's bias, what do you think? What's going on?
I think that the use of the word poison is a loaded word, and it's kind of wanting you to choose a certain way.
You agree? I kind of felt the same way. Like the word poison is, it's got some, it's definitely has some negative connotation attached to it.
What other word would you use? Like
You know,
insect killer? I wouldn't want to. That
Insecticide.
sounds even worse.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe you have a point there. Maybe there's no bias, but maybe there is. Maybe there's bias in saying the word poison. But the good question would be, well, how would you word it? How would you say this otherwise? And I think that's fair. So maybe there's no bias here. I'm not sure that there's a crystal clear answer here. I think this is just mainly for discussion. Letter B, don't you agree that most child care workers are underpaid?
Bias.
Okay, so we agree that there's bias here. And what is the bias?
Don't you agree?
Okay, so those are the words. What type of bias do we call this? It's a leading question. Do you think teachers should communicate frequently with students and their parents about class grades? Is there bias here?
No.
I'm seeing yeses, heads nodded. I'm hearing no's. Just by show of hands, who thinks it's fine if you? Who thinks that there's a bias? I see 2 or 3 hands. We'll talk to you in a minute. Who thinks there's no bias here? Okay, that's most of the class, maybe a little over 2/3 of the class. Okay, you think that there's bias. Why?
Because do you think is kind of like, don't you agree? Like the words do you think is kind of the same thing as don't you agree?
What would be a replacement for that? Do you think? So are the words do you think kind of like don't you agree? Maybe, but what would be the replacement for do you think?
Don't you agree?
Well, that would definitely, don't you agree would definitely be a leading question.
I mean, if we do the same thing, they can both like.
So just saying.
But I think, do you think it's
What is
asking
your
your opinion on it, not saying that, okay, you should think this way or this way. It's more of, what is your opinion?
Right.
I mean, you could say, what is your opinion on, or you have to change it, but.
Well, the trick here is that
Why couldn't you just
the
say?
way
like-
this is worded right now, it's a yes or no question, right? And most of the time, if you're just trying to collect data, yes or no is easier than reading a whole bunch of some verbiage that someone writes or says. Like, you listen to somebody talk about it for 5 minutes, what are they saying? So I don't really care what this question is not asking their opinion on, like, not to elaborate on their opinion on whether teachers should communicate frequently, blah, blah, blah. It's about, do you think yes or no, right? What was your thoughts on this?
Well, I thought it was kind of a loaded question. I think they should have like shortened it to like, do you think teachers should communicate with students and parents? Not like, I don't know how to put it, but it's kind of a loaded question to me.
Okay. Now, I think just what you said a loaded question, But what you followed that up with was, we should shorten it a little bit. It's like it's too long. Do you remember saying that? Now, if you go back here and look at the options, combining two or more issues, double negatives, overlapping answer choices, a loaded question or a leading question. By the way, poison, words that cause strong reaction, loaded, maybe. Down here, you said shorten it. That made me think maybe this is not a leading question, but instead it's using two or more issues. It's combining two or more issues. Think about it. What are the issues here? Do you think teachers should communicate? Let me ask you this. Do you think teachers should communicate with students frequently about class grades?
Yes.
Should your teachers tell you what your class grades are frequently, so
Yes.
you know?
Well, you got styrofoam.
So what?
You got styrofoam.
Right. Of course. But
Not everybody
if
can
we didn't have some sort of online grading system,
Something just happened to your computer.
I don't know.
I think you're supposed to exit.
Okay, so you have an online way of checking your grades immediately. If your teacher is not, say, updating grades every, say, 2 weeks, does that bother you? Yes. I mean, I'm seeing most people nod their head yes. You want to know where you stand in this class. Now, the teachers communicating with students is one issue, but let me ask you this. Do you think teachers should communicate frequently with parents
Yes.
about student grades?
My mom is a scholar stalker.
See, some of us may not want our parents to know our grades, right? So while for students we would say, yes, I want to know, but for parents we might say, no, not so much, right? Just raise your hand, who falls in that category? I want to know what my grades are, but I don't really want everybody else to know my business, particularly my parents.
Well, I don't want my parents to know, but I think they should know. You know?
Okay. Yeah, I agree. So, I'm going to say that there's bias here, and it is two or more issues. Got that? Now there's some more questions here. All of these pages, including going back to what we said a moment ago. Self-selected, was there bias here? Inviting, an article inviting readers to call the paper and express their opinions. Would there be bias here?
I mean,
Maybe.
Now think about what the newspaper wants to know this. They want to know what percent of the entire city population favors the tax increase to raise money for local parks. Okay, so if we ask only newspaper article readers to call in, is there bias?
Yes.
There is bias. Now, it's not necessarily the way it was worded. So a moment ago when I was talking about bias, I was talking about how sample questions or sample survey questions were worded. Here, it's more about the bias that's involved is if I want to know the entire population's opinion, is me just asking newspaper readers the way of figuring out the entire population's opinion? The bias here is asking only newspaper readers. Leaves out many people in the population. So we're not getting the entire population's opinion, we're getting just newspaper readers. Question, comment?
Could there also be bias with the columns because not everyone would want to call in and give their opinion, so there'd be bias on them because there wouldn't be enough information for them to actually make a prediction.
Who says they even have a phone? Right? Or maybe, maybe they have a phone, but they don't want to call in. I agree. So there's another bias here. Calling in. It requires a phone. It requires a motivation to participate in the survey. Logan?
Can you also link all that stuff to the first things you did, just self-selected on that?
Couldn't say that again?
We're saying all this is bias, but can you state that's why it's self-selected and convenience and all that stuff?
State that's
We
why.
could just say it's convenience because they're asking for newspaper instead of.
Oh, not everybody.
I don't know what those are called.
I mean, in a way, you could say that this self-selected thing is convenience because then the newspaper article writer, the people that are taking the information, they're conveniently saying, well, if nobody calls in, then I don't even get any information. You see what I'm saying? But that's kind of, the goal is we need this information. So we're not going to say that it's convenience because there's something very clear here. People have to self-select themselves to call in and participate. All right. What about letter B? What bias do we have here? A reporter interviewing people living in the city's largest park. Now, I want to know the entire population's opinion about raising taxes for local parks. I mean, there's lots of places where bias can be introduced here if a reporter is just standing outside getting people as they leave the city's largest park. What's one example of a bias, Nick?
You only have to have one part.
Okay, so it's
And
just...
they're at a park, so obviously they're going to want the park to be better.
Okay, I like that. Park goers
That's a nice one.
will likely favor park support, even including taxes. But then again, a lot of us that go to parks, it's like we enjoy the park, but do we want to raise taxes? Maybe not. But honestly, if we're going to go to the park, then we're already limiting our opinions. We're limiting it to park goers, not the entire population, right? So we're specifically talking about people who at least enjoy the park. I mean, some of us would prefer taxes to be raised to fund the local movie theaters so that prices could be reduced so we can go to see movies every day for free. Never go to a park, but we like movies. See what I'm saying? A survey, service calls every 50th listening from the local phone book. Letter C here. Is there any bias that you can tell, that you can see from this? Anybody? I can't really see any here. I like the idea of systematically
But what if
sampling.
there's only 50 people in the phone book?
What? Oh, that's true. That's true.
Phone book.
Maybe there is.
What if everyone's not in the phone book?
So maybe there is bias picking only people in the phone book.
Or if there's no over 50 people, then you don't actually.
Good point. Okay, so, oh my. Look right here, real quick. Observational study. We're observing. We're not interrupting people if we're trying to do a study. In a control experiment, we'll have to talk about that in a separate video, okay? So we'll just get to it, but your homework is to finish the rest of these notes, these questions. Okay, so just to finish up here, we'll go ahead and jump to another video in order to pick up the study methods, observational studies, control experiment, and surveys. So thank you, and we'll catch you in the next video.